The Water Engineer. Julian awoke with the sun streaking through the small skylight in room 8, the attic room. It was the last room available at the top of the family-run guest house. It wasn't ideal for the first day in a new job, but as his own director's apartment wasn't quite ready to move into, he was glad of it. He was about to direct a play in the studio theatre of the town's central playhouse, while the more famous musical on which the play he was directing was based would play on the main stage. One advantage of this temporary guest house was that he could start his first day of production meetings with a proper breakfast, a meal Julian rarely bothered with. Preoccupied with concerns as to whether the sound of the orchestra in the main theatre would spill out into the small studio upstairs and threaten the delicacy of his own production, he mooched philosophically down the staircase and was surprised to see that every single breakfast table was occupied. Just as he was attempting a guess at the ratio of guest rooms to breakfast takers, he noticed a Japanese gentleman was waving and smiling from a table in the corner, inviting him to sit down. Considerate, Julian thought. The dapper little man seemed to take too much trouble to create more space than was necessary to accommodate Julian's orange juice and mobile phone, as if it were his duty to leave as little room for himself as he practically needed. Julian remembered the studied courtesy and hospitality he encountered in the Japanese people when he'd assisted on a production of The Taming of the Shrew in English at Tokyo's Globe Theatre a few years previously. As the two men exchanged pleasantries, they both learned that each of them was in the city on business, and having explained that he was a theatre director, which was respectfully acknowledged by a slow nod of his new acquaintance's head, the Japanese gentleman went on to explain that he was a water engineer. Seeing Julian's bemused curiosity, he said, "We learn by watching nature. Observing how the rain falls on a roof, for example, we can follow its natural gravitational path and, by a minimal diversion of that course, conceive of a drainage system which is created simply by the water itself. It's not about the engineering, it's about the water." The Japanese man spoke softly with an economic measure to his phrases which impressed Julian. He was reminded of films he had enjoyed by Kurosawa and Ozu. So few actors, he thought, could adopt such a delivery without sounding affected. Julian's tea arrived, and the Japanese gentleman moved his bulky room key to create yet more table space. Reminded of how much he admired the gentleness of the Japanese lifestyle, Julian noticed himself surveying his own cornflakes and milk with considered appreciation, carefully taking up his spoon as if eating a bowl of cornflakes were some oriental ritual. It seemed in keeping with his companion's serene and delicate demeanour, and he caught himself pretending to contemplate the specialness of almost each flake. The water engineer finished his last piece of perfectly diced melon. Julian began to convince himself that he could even detect the delicate jasmine of the tea garden. "When we prepare a play," Julian began, after finishing his bowl of cereal, he noticed that the Japanese gentleman didn't talk whilst eating his plate of fruit. "Our work is perhaps like yours." He noticed that he was beginning to adopt his breakfast companion's tone and measured delivery. He couldn't help himself, and though he knew he didn't normally speak in this way, he continued, "We must approach the telling of a story as one would go about guiding the journey of a river to the open sea. We must—" Who uses the construction "we must," he thought to himself in a split second. Who did he think he was speaking to? As he found himself consciously trying to speak as if English were a second or third language he had almost mastered. But he was enjoying his newly found tone of voice and went on, We must shape the river's path by digging the earth around its banks to maximize natural confluence. He was proud of that. Maximize natural confluence. Maximize natural confluence to the running stream, taking care never to step into the water or put rocks in its way, but letting the flow of the story take its most simple and unobstructed course to the audience.